today I'm very excited to have Dr. Cheryl McCormick with me as my guest. Dr. McCormick, you attended Vincennes University
Yes, I did.
and Indiana University and graduated from the School of Optometry.
Yes, my graduate degree is from IU.
Okay. And you established Inside of the Wabash in 2009.
Yes, that was my second business.
Okay.
That was my second practice.
Okay. We're going to get there.
Okay.
But let's start with your
Okay.
ties to Knox County first.
Okay.
What was your family life like when you were growing up?
My family life was ideal, in my opinion. I grew up on a small farm, about 200 acres, and all of that was within about 10 miles of our house. My dad was a dairy farmer, had a small dairy. He had to be there to milk the cows morning and evening. My mother had a chronic autoimmune disease, rheumatoid arthritis, for which there was not very much treatment at that time. And so it was good that my dad was never that far away, because my mother was stricken with this when I was a year old. My mother's parents, my grandparents, lived across the road, and it was actually my grandfather's farm that my dad joined as a young man to start his career. And I think a lot of that was tied to having that support network for my mother.
So do you think that's the most beneficial part of living around here is we're rural, but we're close ties with other people?
I think that rural life is the best way to teach children empathy, curiosity, interest in their environment. As I said, I grew up on this small farm. I was allowed a lot of freedom to roam on all that land. I grew up digging up tadpoles, fishing worms, crawdads, helping my grandparents raise the garden. And my grandparents, who not only survived the Depression, but worked as tenant farmers in Illinois to raise the money that they used to buy the farm in Indiana. So I grew up with a tremendous connection to nature, and learned to love the connection of nature and human life.
Do you feel like that's what led you into a science type of field?
Yes, that, and there were some key teachers in my life. The late Freddie Joe Powell was my biology teacher as a freshman at South Knox High School. My freshman year at South Knox was the first year for that new school, so they had a lot of undeveloped land in the back of the school. So in my freshman biology class, we would go outside a lot and collect samples from the ponds out there. We learned to identify the native plants. We learned to identify trees. We'd take those samples from the pond back to the biology lab, look at them under the microscope, and learn about what was involved in life. And then when I went on to my secondary schooling, Vincennes University, I'd say Professor Jay Bardol, as a chemistry teacher, was also a great influence on my life as far as my appreciation for biology and chemistry and science.
So when did you decide optometry was the field for you?
Well, that's my decision to take the career that I chose is sort of wrapped up in the era in which I grew up, because I was interested in biology. I was interested in animals. I helped my grandfather raise pigs. I took charge of the runt pigs in each litter, who my grandfather used to mercifully knock them in the head and not let them suffer. I couldn't let that happen, so I grew up feeding those baby pigs out of a ginger ale bottle, the milk supplement. So my first career choice was when I was 10 years old. I wanted to be a veterinarian. And when I got to be a junior in high school, I had a 4.0 grade point average. I was on my way to becoming valedictorian of our high school. I was getting scholarship opportunities in colleges. And my career advisor in high school, when he asked me what I wanted to do, and I said I wanted to be a veterinarian. Now, mind you, this was in 1969. My high school guidance counselor said that wasn't a good career choice for a woman. And that is because I grew up in the 50s when women were either teachers or they were mothers. And if I might digress on the women as teachers, I don't know if you ever heard the phrase old maid school teacher. That's something that probably people who grew up after the 1960s have never heard, but that's based in fact, because women who chose to become teachers before the 1960s were pretty much forbidden by their employers to get married. It was assumed that a woman could not successfully do her job while she was performing the duties of a wife and probably a mother. So the notion old maid school teachers, and I had some of those. I had at least 2 unmarried school teachers in elementary school.
Oh my goodness.
So I know that was a fact. So when I was told that veterinary science wasn't a good choice for a girl, I was kind of befuddled at that time. So then I started asking, well, what do you think I should do? And I was told that I should be a teacher because I was high in academic achievement. And so I entered Vincennes University with my major being declared elementary education because that's what I was told I should do. And along the way, and this might not happen these days, but back then I was allowed to take a nursing class as an elective. So I took anatomy and physiology with the nursing students as an elective on my way to becoming an elementary school teacher. And after 2 semesters of anatomy and physiology, I decided at that time that I really did want to be a doctor. So then when that was like the eve of my graduation from Vincennes University after 2 years at VU, my associate degree in elementary education with a lot of different electives. I came out of the bathroom one night and said to my dad, I don't want to be a teacher. I want to be a doctor. And my dad, bless his heart, said, well, we wanted your brother to do that, but he didn't want to. So if that's what you want to do, we'll be behind you.
Oh, that's great.
And so I had to disenroll from Purdue University, where I had a scholarship and a room where I was going to major in elementary education, and decided to go to Indiana University. And that was in July. I was able to get accepted, got a room assignment at Indiana University. My choice then was pre-medicine. My dad was the one who then took it upon himself to look at other career choices while I was doing my 3rd year in college. And he met a doctor of optometry who said, this is a good career for a woman because, back in the day when I was a kid, doctors would just sit down to dinner. And this must have been before the day of EMS services. They'd get called out. They'd have house calls. That was the main thing. That was the reason my dad didn't really want me to be a primary care physician because, again, my dad was concerned that I would want to have a family, and he thought that being a physician would take too much away. So my dad brought up this idea, maybe you want to be an eye doctor. And so I applied to the School of Optometry. I was granted admission, and that was not through DEI, though. I was one of only 6 women in that class of 60 in 1974, the first year of optometry school, not because I was a woman, but because I had a 4.0 grade point average, probably thanks to the change in the political environment. At that time, though, I was given that seat instead of a male who might have had a 3.4 grade point
Right.
average.
You graduated from IU.
Yes.
From then till now, how do you have to renew your license or?
Yes, in Indiana, the licensing for a doctor of optometry is 2 years. They are the Indiana Optometry Licensing Board was one of the first licensing boards in the country to win equal pay for equal work. One of the lobbyists that worked for the Indiana Optometric Association back in the 1970s, Dr. Ron Winch, was successful in lobbying Congress and passing the law that pertained to Medicare that was called any willing provider or any qualified provider. So, for the first time in history, doctors of optometry were paid equal on an equal par for equal services as medical doctors.
Did you go into practice on your own, or did you?
I started in practice as an employee of another doctor, and then later that same year, I had our first child. And I spent almost a year taking Nate and dropping him off at the babysitter's and going to work and coming back. I was tired. He was tired. The babysitter told me the cute things that Nate did during the day, and I would drive home in tears and decided that maybe putting my all into the career was taking away some from my responsibilities and my experiences that I should have been experiencing as a mother. Now, I think that's another thing that was it wasn't just an opportunity for me back in the early 70s to become a career woman. It was a challenge because back in that day, that was when women were first allowed to go into these professions. And at that time, there was some under the water storm brewing about some academians were complaining that all this money would be spent on educating a woman in a professional school, and then that woman would go home and have a family and drop out of her profession. And so I sort of had a career guilt feeling there that I needed to keep working, but I knew I couldn't do what I was doing at that time. So I did leave that employment situation. My father-in-law, Don McCormick, had started McCormick Insurance Agency out in the country on the farm in an office next to the house. He said, "Why don't you just have your practice out here?" And I thought that was kind of crazy, but I tried it. And I had patients call and say, "What am I going to do? You left that practice. Are you going to work?" So I said, "Oh, okay, I am." So I started giving them the address to our office. And then our second child was born, and I worked out of my house, mainly seeing patients on the weekends when I could hire a high school girl to babysit the kids. And I would see patients during the week during the nap times. So it wasn't until my two children started to school that I started my first office in Vincennes.
I'm picturing you working out of a home and the equipment that you would need.
The equipment was not quite as advanced at that time as it is now. Now it would be a lot more difficult for me to offer the comprehensive services that I do in the office. Back then, it was more, there were no third party payment providers there. It was, eye care was pretty much between the patient and the provider. And so I had the equipment required to do a basic eye exam. I had purchased that while I was in the process of working for the other doctor because the goal was to become a co-owner in that practice. So yeah, I was kind of set up to do that. We put the frames in the what was our dining room in the house. We had child gates to keep the kids out of there. My
So
first
you,
employee was hired as a babysitter
oh,
to watch the children so I could see
so you just
patients.
figured it out as you
It
went.
just kind of was
Uh,
seat of the pants. I had
uh,
to be there. I wanted to be there
uh-huh.
as much as I could.
So then you moved on and you opened a practice
Mhm.
here,
Yes,
and now you've added employees.
yes,
You're not just
yes.
yourself working.
When I first moved my practice from the house to town, I rented office space. And interestingly enough, the young woman that I had hired to babysit, I knew that she was such a good person and a good worker that I taught her how to fit glasses and
Mhm.
how to be my assistant. And so I hired her, rented some property in town, moved the practice to town when the kids started school, acquired two other employees to supplement that work. Then in, I would say, the late 1980s, when the kids became preteens, and I was offered an opportunity to go to work in an ophthalmology practice with Dr. Frank Emmert.
Uh-huh.
At that time, then I would just have to come to work, punch out at 5. I could make the track meets after school. That, in the role of mother and doctor, seemed like a good career move at the time.
Mhm.
So I sold that practice to Dr. Emmert and worked with him for about 12 years. And then it was after the kids were about to graduate from high school and I got through that part of being a mother that I said, okay, now I'm going to go back and start my own business. And that was when Inside of the Wabash started in 2009.
I'm a big word fanatic. I love words, and so the name of your practice is it's thrilling to me how the wordplay of it is really cool.
Well, I have to give credit to that to my husband,
Oh,
Ray,
really? Uh-huh.
because when he bought the building, Ray was all about let's buy a building in
Mhm.
historic Main Street. And when that building came up for sale, Tony Burkhart had built it and sort of got it ready for some sort of commercial business. And I showed it to Ray and I said, how about this? And he said, well, we should call it Inside of the Wabash because you could look right out the Wabash River. So
That's very cool.
worked out great.
Okay.
Actually, the buyer of my practice, who just purchased in August of 2023, has decided to keep that name for the
Oh, well,
business.
I mean, it's a perfect fit. So I saw an article about you in Women of Optometry, Women in Optometry, sorry, in March of 2010. And it was focused on that the title was Go Green. Do you remember that? It was about your furnishings in your office and how you had
Oh,
tied it
yes, that
into um,
that would have been right after we had
uh-huh.
started the business on Main Street. So we purchased this old building, which had formerly housed Barber's Gift Shop. Anyone who grew up in Vincennes in the 1960s knows exactly where that is. Um, at that time, we had a lot of timber that had been cut off of our farm ground. Most of it was trees that had been knocked down in tornadoes and winds, and Ray had to have it cut up anyway. So Ray Chatton had purchased a lot of this timber and milled it and was going to sell it as for construction. So in 2008, I think, was about when the home construction business was kind of going south.
Mhm.
And my husband said, hey, under this old carpeting in this office, there's just plywood. Let's put down some of this red oak from
Uh-huh.
McCormick Farms. And so the flooring in the office all came out of Knox County. I hired a friend, Dan Hoops, who had an independent carpentry business, who did the internal remodeling. And Dan, he's a carpenter, but his college degree was in art. So he added a lot of very artistic touches like heavy crown molding and
Uh-huh.
columns and things. And a lot of that is made out of the columns that go up in the front of the office are made from, I think that's sassafras that was cut off our
Oh,
farm.
that's
So we
neat.
have, and then the countertops are topped with little bits of walnut. So anytime there was a new project that had to be built in the office, I would send the carpenter out to the machine shed, and he'd just get the lumber he needed and have it finished, and there we go.
So it's very local.
Yes,
That's
all locally
great.
sourced. Yeah.
Okay, so I looked up an old yearbook and found you. Think back to that girl, and if you could go back and talk to her today, what would you say to her?
Wow. That's a good one. I think that I think that a lot of the things that I did in life turned out well because part of this was included in my valedictory speech in 1971. It's kind of like do what you think that you need to do, be true to yourself. And there may be obstacles along the way, but usually a lot of times you can find a path. And my path was easier than most because I had a supportive family. But I had a lot of challenges and I worked hard to be where I am. If I had one thing to do differently career wise, I would have to say that I would probably try to balance my role as a mother more. Um, and this didn't hit me until the last few years. As my daughter, I only had two children. When I had a boy, then the second one was a girl. Being a career minded person, my first thought was, oh, good, I can quit now. I have one of each. And I thought I was being a good mother. I thought I was providing them a nice, secure home and lots of love, and I did. But now I realize my daughter has decided to be a stay at home mom. She has five children and she does a great job of running things around there. And when I go visit as a grandmother, I realize that there are a lot of things I missed out by not being there as much as I was. And looking back on that, I started my second business in 2009. My kids were up and away. And that's been, 16 years.
Mm-hmm.
So there's always time to get caught up. And, if you're going into a profession where you have a chance to be a part of a group, perhaps instead of trying to do it all, I think that that's the only way you're going to make it and be happy and fulfilled. I think there's been too much pressure on women since the 1960s to do it all. Remember the commercial? I can bring home the bacon, fry it up in the pan.
And I do remember that.
That's not easy.
Right. Okay, so we're going to wrap it up with this last question, which I ask every guest. If I gave you $1 million today and said you can invest it in a project, but it's something that you won't see the results of, it'll be in the future, what would you invest your $1 million in?
At this point, if I had $1 million, knowing that my kids are already accounted for, I would talk to the Nature Conservancy, which is a nonprofit, privately funded group. They have done a lot of restoration in the United States of wetlands. They're working to preserve forests. They've done, the Nature Conservancy is the biggest conservation group in the world. They have restored rainforests in Brazil. I really think that our biggest challenge at this point is the possible loss of our home. And I think that Mother Earth needs a lot more attention. I think the going green is where I would invest my $1 million
Very
right
good.
now.
Very, very good. All right. I want to thank you again for being here. I really appreciate it. I hope we've inspired someone. And
I hope so too.
yeah, thank you.
Thank you.